Hello Goobers! Welcome to the channel. Today we are going to take a look at a few 1 vs. 1s from Beyond All Reason, an open source and free real-time strategy game that is being developed by a team of volunteers. This game is a work in progress, but I'll tell you now that it feels more complete than many other games on the market. In these 1 vs. 1s, I'm playing against an opponent that not only has more experience than I do, but is better at the game than I am. Sit back, relax, pour yourself a cold one, or a hot one for you northerners, and let's learn from my mistakes. Hey Goob Crowd, before we get into today's video, I would like to give a shout out to Living Buddy Pillow. He is the artist that makes all of this happen. From the art of the Goobermeister himself to the banner for the channel that depicts the Goober Crowd in all of its glory. He is available for commissions if you like his artwork. All you have to do is check out the link in the description of this video and it will take you straight to his Twitter page. Now let's get back into it. Into our first match today, we are playing on Faster Than Light. I am spawning in the bottom right corner as an OS 15 versus a German player by the name of Mr. Tumnus, who is an OS 36. OS stands for Open Skill and is Beyond All Reason's way of determining whether or not a player is skilled. The higher the number, the better. The lower, the worse the player is expected to perform. This isn't necessarily true in all cases, but it can be pretty reliable. Mr. Tumnus is starting out with 3 mexes and going into 3 solar collectors, whereas I am starting out with a standard approach of 2 mexes, 2 solars, and straight into a vehicle plant. Now on this map we have 2 high grounds, one right here and another one right here. There are also several choke points scattered about the map that my opponent is going to make great use of, especially when it comes to blocking me into my base and when it comes to out microing my macro. And let me tell you, my macro game is not all that great, especially in 1 vs. 1s. I get laser focused on trying to micro, especially with 5 scouts that I'm pumping out right here, one after another after another. And after the game, he did mention to me that I am a little too scout heavy at the beginning of the match, and it comes back to bite me. He just gets his right R up and he sees that I'm bringing in these scouts, and I make the treacherous decision to try to take out one of those grunts, but scouts, they cannot take out a grunt. After polishing up my scouts, he moves forward for some aggression with his grunts, and I have started to expand into my natural expansion, and he is just now getting on his, but he knows something that I don't know, and probably never would have figured out had I not watched these replays. If you take a look over here at the low ground, a little too close there, we will find 3 mexes, and if you carefully queue your commander up onto the ledge, you can reach down and place all 3 mexes and 2 light laser towers, securing that early defense and expansion without having to actually go down to the low ground. Whereas I thought you had to take one of these constructors and go all the way down and around in order to get to them to secure that expansion. If I ever play this map again, I'm definitely going to utilize this knowledge and take my commanders to the edge and secure that early expand as fast as possible. And really all that's needed to secure it are a couple of light laser towers, and that's just about it. With that being said, that places me at a significant disadvantage in the early game economy. With Mr. Tumnus having played this map before, he is really good at utilizing his early aggression to lock me into my base and prevent me from expanding. I quickly throw down some light laser turrets to prevent him from coming in and disrupting any of my economy inside of my main base. I'll be honest, it's a good trade. 1 grunt for 1 constructor that's going to set me back pretty significantly here in the early game, and it's a trade I would take any day. Now, I'm playing Armada and he is playing Cortex, and there are a few key differences, especially with pawns and grunts. The grunts have the better range and opportunity to kite the pawns and the blitzes, which are my light tanks here. And this allows him to do some fighting retreats where he just gets off just barely enough damage to force his opponent into a retreat. trying to keep up with a unit that is outranging you and you're only slightly faster than them is not necessarily a tenable position. The downside to the Cortex bots is that they do have some damage fall off, where if you're at the outer reaches, they aren't doing as much damage, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. I've lost my expansion, and I'm going to try to scout out to see where he is with his expansions and see what kind of opportunities I can have. He's got a little grunt stuck up there on the corner there. I'm not sure if that's intentional, but he tries to go in for some aggression and miscalculates, or he just wasn't paying attention. And you can see that if you can get these light tanks into range, they are just going to shred light bots. The downside to vehicles is the amount of metal that you have to contribute in the early game is significantly higher than bots. He does eventually see that I have scattered out one of his expansions and moves in to get me out of his neighborhood. And this does go back to prove that the Cortex can use their range advantage to snipe my scouts as they try to slip by, but unfortunately I just was not quick enough to get by. At this point in the game, I realize I'm just too far behind and I really have to do something. I shift my blitzes up towards the right flank because I figured that's kind of where he was going to go with them, to check on any further expansions that I've made. But instead I leave my left flank open, allowing him to have an open door into the left side expansion here. Now, this doesn't place me in a very good position, and I'm not very quick to react to this news. My only advantage at this point in the game is that the Blitz has a greater health pool and greater DPS, and in my opinion, they have more mobility when it comes to hit and runs than the bot does because of their survivability. I don't really take advantage of any of these traits, and instead I just let them sit around and allow Mr. Tumnus to come in and erase any progress that I have on my second expansion. And this is something that I'm guilty of just about every game. I get too invested trying to plan out my economy that I am not being aggressive enough to keep my opponent on his back foot, but instead I allow him every opportunity to just march all over every expansion that I have, and it does not allow me to get that early game advantage that most people would take advantage of over their opponent, especially since the longer you have those mexes down, the more metal you're going to have over time, the bigger your army is going to be, and the more ground you can cover when your opponent is being aggressive instead of turtling up and building static defenses. After a certain point, static defenses are no longer helpful, especially when you reach a critical mass of grunts where you can walk in and destroy 2 or 3 light laser turrets while taking only 2 or 3 losses from your grunts. Mr. Tumnus is really good about making sure that I don't get that opportunity to expand out, and right here he's pushing me back into my natural expansion and keeping me on my back foot. And this draws my attention away from my own economy, which realistically I should have already had planned out and queued up, knowing that I'm going to have to spend a vast majority of my time pushing my opponent back and being as aggressive as possible, denying his expansions, intercepting his attack waves, and doing as much damage as I can. But instead I spend a vast majority of my time during this match just trying to catch up economically. If you take a look at the top right of the screen, you can see the economic disparity here between myself and Mr. Tumnus. Because I haven't been doing much scouting or being aggressive whatsoever, I do not realize that he has already switched from bots to vehicles, and that my transition from blitzes to stouts, medium tanks rather, I am not going to have as much of an advantage as I really thought. Pounders, which are the tanks that you see here from Mr. Tumnus, are really good against blitzes and bots, especially when they're clumped up into a big ball, or even if they're just remotely close to each other. Those pounders have a pretty sizable AoE radius where they are going to not only do big damage, but they also knock back units physically away from the pounder and any units that are behind it. They're not necessarily that great against stouts and medium tanks. As you saw just now, I was able to very easily pick off one of those pounders with relative ease with the medium tanks, but I'm still locked in my base at an economic disadvantage. And even if I had switched from blitzes to stouts earlier, I don't think that I would have been able to push through and do any damage to him economically. He's already switched the vehicles. There's nothing really I could have done. Now, looking back on this, I think that if I would have been a little more aggressive and planned out my economy earlier and been less defensive with my posture, I would have had a better chance. And right here shows the power of the medium tank versus grunts and pawns. They absolutely annihilate them, especially with their advantage with range and DPS, and they've got the AoE damage, but it's just not enough since he's already transitioned to vehicles. I try to push forward here, but it's not enough. He out micros me, he splits up his forces and gets a slight surround on me, and that was just enough for him to polish off all of my blitzes and leaving me only a few stouts remaining. And the rest of the game is just him polishing me off, pushing me back. It's the coup de grace. I'm done for. It's over. The fat lady has sung. So I'm thinking I'm just going to throw my commander in there. Maybe take out a few tanks with him. I know it's over. He knows it's over. I get off a few D-guns. It gives me a little bit of hope. I'm not going to lie. We all know I'm not coming back from this. He's got all of his side of the map. He's expanding to the left side of the map. I have absolutely nothing left. It's over. It was a good game, though. I learned quite a bit about this map and what I've been doing wrong just by going back and watching these replays. So I very much stress that if you get into RTSs and you have an opportunity to really go back and watch your replays, do it. You will learn a lot about yourself, especially with how you can take these mexes from the high ground instead of going all the way around. You get to see what your opponent has been doing that you were doing wrong and what your opponent was doing that you were doing right, and try to slowly, piece by piece, find the small things and fix them, because the small things really do add up over time. In the beginning, he started off with basic solar collectors, which he has reclaimed in lieu of advanced solar collectors, which is something that I didn't do or consider. But if we do a comparison side by side, advanced solar collectors, pound for pound, metal for metal, are significantly better. And that's the end of Game 1. Now, Game 2 is going to be quite a surprise. I really was not expecting the kind of plays that he's going to be making, and I'm really excited to go back and watch this with you all. I hope you've learned a lot from the first game, because I really, really did. I love going back and watching my replays. I love watching other players play. It gives me ideas and strategies that I just never would have come up with all by myself. So strap in, let's load up Game 2, and let's take a look. All right, back at it again with Game 2. I'm spawning in again at the bottom right corner with Mr. Tumnus, selecting a different location at the top left this time. It does appear that he's going to be going with a 3-mex opener, and I'm going to open with bots this time, which should require less metal, but a greater investment of energy. So it should even out in the long run. But the advantage of bots over vehicles is that you can get the bots out a little bit faster to hit those expansions a little bit earlier. As a side note, I really love the soundtrack for this game. I believe that Ryan Krauss has done an amazing job building a world with the music that he produces. It gives me a lot of EVE Online vibes, which I used to play almost religiously back in the day. Taking a look at Mr. Tumnus and what he's doing, he's just now getting to his 2 solars, and it does look like he's going for a bot lab, which should mirror my opening quite well, as a matter of fact. But he does seem to manage his micro a lot better than I do, and with the conversation that we had in between this game and the last, he did mention that I was a little too scout heavy in the beginning, so I do pull back on the scouts just a bit during the early game phase here so that I can save some of that metal and a little bit of that energy so that I can utilize that to pump out a construction bot just a little bit sooner to grab those mexes. He makes quick work of the first tick, and I leave one behind just to get an eye on the entrance to his base so that I can get a heads up. when he begins to move his forces out. A light laser tower goes down to prevent some of the early harass, which he is all too familiar with given his experience with me and with other players in general. And he makes great use of that tight and enclosed space to place down some solars to block ingress into his base while he moves some bots up to the top to capture some of those mexes as he sends his forces forward. I am still a little bit behind, even though I got my bot lab down first. He utilizes the range on those grunts so that he can take advantage of their range to effectively kite my pawns, which is an excellent option, Cortex versus Armada. Now, if I can get within range of the grunts, then I'm able to get off a pretty sizable chunk of damage onto his grunts with my pawns, but it's just not as easy as I really think it's going to be. And I do eventually get within range and take out a couple of his grunts, but at this point, I've taken significant losses. He's moving forward with his commander so he can establish some foothold in front of my base and once again lock me in, effectively ensuring that I am unable to expand. He uses a construction bot to pump out more bots, while he uses another construction bot to build a construction turret to build more construction bots to build more bots. It's robots making robots, and I am all about that life. It's just a never-ending stream of robots coming out of Mr. Tumnus's base directly to mine, placing me on the defensive. I'm using my commander and a Lazarus to the best of my ability to try to claim as much of that free metal in the ground and patch up my grunts before I try to make another push. But once again, I allow him to just build light laser turrets right in front of my natural expansion, locking me in, and I play again entirely too passively for a map this small. A perfect counter to being locked in like this is to build a couple of Rocketeers, or if you've opened up with vehicles, to build a couple of artillery pieces just to throw down some aggression onto those pushes with those towers to prevent you from being locked in. I do try to push forward with my commander here, but he very quickly reacts with his grunts, and I know that I can't get my pawns within range quickly enough without the critical mass of pawns just absolutely decimating my grunt. He does get off a D-gun, and I was very slow to react to that and do lose a few of those pawns, but I was just out of range for his second one. If we pause the game here and take a look at the economic situation, you see that I have 7 solar collectors and 3 bots trying to pump out as many pawns as possible, but I do not have the economy to sustain such a project. And if we go take a look on his side of the map, we can see that he has 1 more metal extractor than I do, and just about the same amount of solar collectors as I do, and we're about neck and neck economically, but he's just utilizing his resources a lot better than I am, especially since I was able to get off the aerial expansion that he is not aware of just yet. So I really have to work hard and remain diligent to prevent him from discovering that expansion so that I can A, keep up with the metal production, and B, keep pumping out as many bots as possible. But I'm not quick enough to react to him placing these light laser towers on my door. Even though I do eventually get out some Rocketeers, he just has so much more production going on than I do. And he is a little bit better with his macro and micro than I am, which leads him to be just slightly ahead of the curve compared to myself throughout the entirety of the game. We do trade blows here, where I do come out on top just by a slight margin, and that gives me a little bit of confidence to try to push forward. Now that I'm getting out some Rocketeers, I can try to contest his front line, but at the same time, he's already boxed me in, and he's already begun expanding out, and is going to pull ahead much more quickly than I am. And he does make an attempt to go up towards my second expansion, almost taking out a Lazarus as he does, but I do end up losing a couple more of my pawns, but I'm not producing anything at this point. After I've brought out those Rocketeers to try to poke and harass his light laser towers, I just leave myself not producing any units. I'm pooling metal, I'm pooling a lot of energy, and I'm just not utilizing my resources effectively whatsoever, as he already has an entire right-hand side of the map queued up with one of his bots. If I continue to harass him and poke and prod with my Rocketeers, eventually I am going to bust a hole through his light laser towers, as I'm beginning to transition into a vehicle composition so that I can counter those grunts with medium tanks. And unfortunately, he was able to slip a grunt by to identify that I have indeed taken another expansion, and he's going to try to limit that in every way possible, as his bots begin to make their way around the map to try to claim it for themselves as well. And with my Rocketeers doing a lot of heavy lifting, trying to poke and prod at those light laser towers, taking them out one by one, he takes his commander and he makes his way down towards the low ground just to the left of my starting position, claiming those mexes, and he does something that I did not expect he would do. He begins to build a light laser tower on top of the high ground into my main base so he can begin to take them out. At the same time, he's distracting me with a small push to try to bait me into a fight at the entrance of my natural expansion so that he can get away with creating these light laser turrets in my base. And I'm too slow to react. I did not notice that that was happening until he had already destroyed both of my mexes and begun working on my solar collectors. I do reroute one of my bots to intercept this light laser tower to attempt to destroy it, which I do end up losing. The second one coming in right behind it does manage to take it out, but the damage is done, and once again I find myself the victim of some very clever tactics that I never in a million years would have thought of. Now, I do eventually push forward to try to bust my way through this now that I have some medium tanks, but it's a little bit too late for that. He's already transitioned from grunts to thugs, which have a similar range to stouts, and I am absolutely decimated while he already has claimed the 3 mexes on the low ground and has a total of, I think, 19 metal extractors to my measly 7. And all he has to do is just make one good push into my natural, and that is it. He's won the game. We take a look back at these replays and see that my position was absolutely hopeless. He's just having a stream of thugs and grunts just stream in and easily takes the win. And that's it for game 2. I did not perform as well as I really wanted to, but going back and watching these has been extraordinarily illuminating. Now, for the third game, it's something I did not expect to happen. It's something I'm familiar with, but never would have thought to happen in a 1v1. Let's check it out. All right, we are back at it for the last time, the third game against Mr. Tumnus. And this time, he does something that I truly never would have expected anybody to do in a 1 versus 1. In fact, in the community, it's kind of a meme opening, not something that goes according to plan, especially if it's happened to you before and you are prepared for it. Mr. Tumnus is opening up with 3 mexes and going straight into his energy production, a very similar intro that I am performing and that he has performed the 2 times before, and then he goes straight into an aircraft factory, which is not something you would typically start out with on a map this small and this metal rich. Learning from my mistakes from the previous 2 games, I'm going to start off with building 2 construction bots and then make my way into building some scouts and eventually some infantry so that I can get out and expand more rapidly and cover more ground before he can react to it. But he has built himself an air transport and is moving to his natural expansion while I'm just now getting out with one of my construction bots to get to my natural expansion. He throws down a light laser tower just to ensure that any early aggression will be thwarted and ticks can't slide by, and takes off with his commander. heading precariously close to my starting position. I don't see this coming. I don't have a radar up, and I have not scouted in order to see that his commander is missing from his base. And even if I did scout, he's got that light laser turret up, so none of the ticks that I send his way are going to make their way through. Now, the game did alert me that an aircraft was detected and was visible, and confused me, so he throws his commander straight into my base and immediately begins degunning all of my infrastructure and surprises the hell out of me. I cannot fathom what I could have done in this situation, especially given no opportunity to actually see this coming. The only thing I could think of is to throw my commander at the situation with the Lazarus behind to try to sneak in some repairs, but it just is not enough. He whittles me down with his commander and the light laser turret behind him and finishes me off. Wow. And that is it. What an explosive and to some relatively eventful games, in my opinion. I learned a lot going back and watching the 3 replays, and I hope to do this more often. If you have any suggestions or any replays that you think I should cover, please reach out to me in the comments below. Also, please, I would like for you to like the video and subscribe. It helps a lot. And do not forget to go check out the artist. I will leave his information in the comments below, and thank you very much. Have a nice day.